Matthew 22, Jesus tells a story about a wedding feast, wedding party that helps us understand how to live as Christians. In this story, people were invited as guests, but they were too busy with their own work, own lives to come. Even among those who came for the party, some of them were not dressed properly for the celebration. It means they were not properly prepared to come to this wedding party. Therefore, the host says, many are invited, but few are chosen. Many are invited, but just a few are prepared. So this story teaches us important lessons about living as Christians. We shouldn't be so distracted by our daily lives that we miss God's invitation. It's not that our daily living is not important, but it is a reminder that we are the people of God. It is about our identity and ultimate purpose of our lives. Also, this story of wedding party tells us it's not enough just to show up. We need to be ready to live as God's people. Being ready means more than looking good on the outside. It means having a heart that is truly thankful for God's invitation and willing to live accordingly. Jesus also teaches about our responsibilities in this world. When asked about paying tax, Jesus explains we should fulfill both our earthly responsibility, like paying tax, and our spiritual accountability, our relationship with God. We are responsible for both. So when some religious leaders tried to challenge the idea of resurrection by asking complicated questions about marriage in heaven, Jesus explains that life after resurrection is different from our earthly life. It is more complete without the limit, without worries we face now. Therefore, throughout the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus keeps teaching us and reminding us to shift our focus from earthly mindset to heavenly mentality, kingdom mentality. Finally, Jesus teaches the most important commandments: love God and love your neighbors. These are not just rules to follow. No, they are the ways to live that show we understand God's love for us. Once you understand and experience God's love for you, you want to live loving others and loving God. This is not just a checklist to follow. No, these are the ways to live that show we understand and experience God's love for others. Everything in our faith comes down to loving God and loving others. Let us remember, God invites us to be part of His kingdom. And the question is this: are we ready? Am I ready to live as His people? Am I thankful for His invitation? And am I showing it in how I live? Let us be prepared to live with kingdom mindset, heavenly mentality. Jesus is continuing to teach us and remind us to have this heavenly mentality. This is Matthew 22. Matthew 23. First, let us understand what Jesus saw that troubled him. Religious leaders were teaching God's law and commandment, but they didn't live it out themselves. They didn't live it out. They knew all the right words, right lessons, right teachings, but their actions, their behavior didn't match it. Jesus tells people to follow the teachings from Moses and from those religious leaders, but advises them not to emulate, not to follow these leaders' behavior. Think about someone wearing a fancy cloth, fancy uniform, but not doing their job. That's how Jesus saw these religious leaders. They had a fancy robe and a fancy cloth as religious leaders, but they didn't live out what they believed, what they knew. They wanted everyone just to see how holy they looked. Oh, I'm a holy religious leader. So Jesus says this is all just for showing up, show off. These leaders loved being called special titles like a father or teacher. forgetting that God is our real Father and Jesus is our true teacher. He calls these hypocrites whitewashed tombs. Whitewashed tombs. This shows us how someone can look very religious while being spiritually empty. What really bothered Jesus was seeing these leaders travel far away to convert one person to their religion, only to make that person worse than before. Yes, they traveled a lot, like Jesus. Jesus was traveling a lot to teach and preach the gospel. Therefore, in the same way, the religious leaders at the time, they also were traveling a lot. But what they did, what they taught, what they preached was not that fruitful, faithful. No, they just made people worse than before. Why did this happen? They focused on strict rules, human traditions instead of love, harsh judgment instead of mercy, and pride instead of humility. They knew the words of God, but they didn't pay attention to the heart of God giving that words. This matters for us today as well. We might know a lot about religion, but God cares more about how we live. Our focus is not about looking good to others. Our focus should be about letting God change us from the inside. When we go to church, when we read the Bible, it should change how we treat people, not just to give us religious knowledge. Therefore, Jesus invites us to have a real relationship with God instead of focusing on looking religious. It's all about letting God transform us from inside and letting God's love work through us. Jesus wants us to be people whose faith shows in their love for others, not in how religious they look, not in how religious they look. Let us remember, Jesus cares more about what's in our hearts than how we appear to others. Real faith changes us and transforms us from the inside out. And that change naturally shows in how we live and love others. Let us remember this. This is chapter 23.